The story of Sheila Devalue is one of obsession, betrayal, and unrelenting darkness. It begins in the shadows of suburban Connecticut, where a seemingly ordinary woman's desires would lead her down a path of cold-blooded murder. In the early 2000s, Sheila Devalue lived a life that many would envy. She had a successful career in pharmaceuticals, a solid marriage, and an air of confidence that masked the storm brewing within. Beneath her composed exterior was a woman who was consumed by a twisted infatuation that would eventually dismantle her life and the lives of others. Sheila's obsession began innocuously, rooted in a workplace affair. At Purdue Pharma, where she worked, she became enamored with a colleague, Nelson Sessler. Nelson was charming, professional, and unattainable at least to Sheila. The problem was, Nelson was dating another co-worker, Annalisa Raimundo. This love triangle was not merely a matter of unrequited affection, it was the catalyst for a horrifying descent into murder. Sheila's fixation on Nelson morphed into a venomous hatred for Annalisa. Friends and colleagues had no idea of Sheila's dark feelings. She was adept at hiding her true self. But behind closed doors, Sheila meticulously plotted her rival's downfall. On November 8, 2002, Sheila acted on her dark desires. It was a crisp autumn day in Stamford, Connecticut, and Annalisa Raimundo, unaware of the danger lurking, was alone in her apartment. Sheila arrived at Annalisa's home under the guise of a friendly visit. What transpired next was pure horror. The murder was savage and unrelenting. Sheila stabbed Annalisa multiple times, leaving her to bleed out in her own home. To mislead investigators, Sheila called 911 herself, disguising her voice to report a domestic disturbance. The ruse initially worked. Investigators were thrown off by the anonymous call. However, traces of Sheila's DNA were left at the scene, evidence that would later become her undoing. For months, the case went cold. Annalisa's friends and family were devastated, struggling to understand who could have committed such a brutal act. Meanwhile, Sheila carried on with her life, harboring a deadly secret. Sheila's life began to unravel in 2003. Her marriage to her husband, Paul Christos, was deteriorating. The cracks in their relationship widened as Sheila's erratic behavior and obsession with Nelson became more apparent. She concocted elaborate lies to spend time with Nelson, claiming she was visiting her sick brother or attending work conferences. Paul, ever trusting, remained unaware of her deceit until Sheila's desires turned fatal once more. Sheila's second act of violence was as cold and calculated as the first. In March 2003, she invited Paul to play a game at their home. The game involved blindfolding Paul and handcuffing him to a chair. Sheila claimed it was a trust exercise, but it was anything but. As Paul sat vulnerable, Sheila plunged a knife into his chest not once, but multiple times. Paul fought for his life, managing to escape and call 911 despite his grievous injuries. Sheila's plan had failed, and her arrest was imminent. When questioned by police, Sheila's demeanor was chillingly calm. She claimed it was an accident, a game gone wrong. But investigators were unconvinced. As authorities delved deeper into Sheila's life, they uncovered the threads linking her to Annalisa Raimundo's murder. Sheila's DNA, found under Annalisa's fingernails, tied her directly to the crime. Coupled with her motive, her obsessive desire for Nelson Sessler, prosecutors had a solid case. During her trial, Sheila's behavior was unnerving. She represented herself in court, cross-examining witnesses with a cold detachment that sent shivers down the spines of those present. Her lack of remorse was evident, and the jury saw through her facade. In 2004, Sheila Devalue was convicted of the attempted murder of Paul Christos and sentenced to 25 years in prison. A few years later, in 2012, she was tried and convicted for the murder of Annalisa Raimundo, receiving an additional 50-year sentence. Sheila Devalue's story is a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. Her ability to manipulate, deceive, and kill without remorse paints a dark portrait of a woman consumed by obsession. Her crimes left a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions, ensuring her place in the annals of true crime infamy. To understand Sheila Devalue's descent into murderous obsession, one must examine the duality of her life. By all outward appearances, she was a high-achieving professional, respected in her field. Her colleagues described her as intelligent and driven, traits that masked the sinister nature lurking beneath. At home, she was the quintessential suburban wife, though cracks in this facade began to form long before her violent crimes. Sheila's marriage to Paul Christos was far from idyllic. Paul was a gentle, trusting man, a biomedical scientist whose quiet demeanor starkly contrasted Sheila's bold and controlling personality. Though Paul loved Sheila, their relationship lacked the intimacy she craved. Her growing dissatisfaction paved the way for an obsessive affair with Nelson Sessler. Yet even Nelson, the object of her fixation, was unaware of the extent of Sheila's obsession. To him, she was merely a flirtatious coworker, not the calculating predator she would reveal herself to be. Sheila's obsession with Nelson Sessler consumed her. She began stalking Nelson and Annalise, prying into their personal lives with an intensity that alarmed those who knew her. Friends later recounted how Sheila would fixate on Annalise in conversations, expressing jealousy disguised as curiosity. She would ask invasive questions about Annalise's life, relationships, and habits, as though trying to piece together a blueprint of her rival's world. Her fixation drove her to take increasingly drastic measures. Sheila began to fabricate stories to keep Nelson close, inventing crises and manipulating his emotions. Yet even as she pursued him relentlessly, Nelson remained emotionally distant, treating their interactions as casual and fleeting. This rejection fueled Sheila's hatred for Annalise, whom she saw as the obstacle standing between her and the life she believed she deserved. Psychologists who later examined Sheila's case described her as a textbook example of narcissistic and antisocial personality traits. She displayed a chilling lack of empathy, an inflated sense of entitlement, and a willingness to manipulate or harm others to achieve her goals. To Sheila, the people around her were pawns in a game she controlled, a game with deadly stakes. Her actions also reflected a startling level of premeditation. Sheila meticulously planned Annalise's murder, studying her routine and ensuring that the crime would leave as little evidence as possible. She took care to conceal her identity, donning gloves and altering her appearance. Yet despite her careful planning, she underestimated the resilience of forensic science and the determination of law enforcement. In the wake of Annalise Raimundo's murder, Sheila maintained her composure, returning to work and her daily routine as though nothing had happened. She even offered condolences to Nelson, feigning sympathy for his loss. Her ability to compartmentalize her actions was both chilling and deeply unsettling. For Nelson, Annalise's death was devastating. He was left grappling with grief and confusion, unaware that the person responsible for his girlfriend's murder was someone he saw almost daily. Sheila's presence in his life during this time added another layer of psychological cruelty to her crimes. Sheila's attempt to murder her husband, Paul Christos, marked a critical turning point in her unraveling. On the night of the attack, Sheila's demeanor was eerily calm as she proposed the trust game. She lured Paul into a vulnerable position with calculated ease, exploiting his trust in her to carry out her plan. Her choice to blindfold him underscored the cold-blooded nature of her intentions. She wanted him to feel helpless, to be at her mercy. What Sheila did not anticipate was Paul's resilience. Despite his injuries, he fought back, using his survival instincts to escape and alert authorities. His ability to survive the attack not only saved his life, but also set in motion the events that would lead to Sheila's ultimate downfall. Sheila's courtroom demeanor was as unsettling as her crimes. Representing herself during her trials, she demonstrated a disturbing confidence and detachment. She cross-examined witnesses, including her own ex-husband Paul, in a manner that many described as cruel and calculated. Her lack of remorse was evident as she questioned Paul about the attack, attempting to paint herself as the victim of a misunderstanding. Prosecutors highlighted the inconsistencies in Sheila's stories, as well as the overwhelming physical evidence linking her to both crimes. DNA evidence, surveillance footage, and testimonies from coworkers painted a damning picture of a woman who was willing to destroy lives to fulfill her desires. The impact of Sheila Davallou's actions reverberated far beyond her immediate victims. Annalise Raimundo's family was left shattered by her loss, struggling to come to terms with the brutality of her death. Paul Christos, though he survived, was forever scarred physically and emotionally by the betrayal and violence he endured. Nelson Sessler, too, carried the weight of Sheila's actions. Though he bore no responsibility for what transpired, he became an unwitting player in a deadly triangle, his life forever altered by the choices of a woman he barely knew. Sheila Davalloo now spends her days in a Connecticut prison, serving a combined 75-year sentence. Though she has exhausted most of her appeals, she continues to maintain her innocence, showing no signs of remorse or acknowledgement of her crimes. Forensic psychologists have speculated that her inability to accept responsibility is a hallmark of her personality disorder, a final reminder of the chilling depths of her pathology. The story of Sheila Davalloo is one that lingers, a stark reminder of how obsession and manipulation can escalate into unspeakable violence. Her crimes defy easy explanation, rooted in a darkness that few can comprehend. As the years pass, the memory of her actions continues to haunt those whose lives she touched, a grim testament to the capacity for evil that lies hidden beneath the surface.